Okay. Hello, all who are watching later. We've got one participant today. Welcome to the second to last class for the Mix and Match Blanket Club by Esme Crick. Today we're going to talk about blocking your strips, whether you should or not. And I recommend you do. And I'm going to talk to you about how and how to start joining your strips. And then next month, we're going to talk about how to finish off the joining and adding an optional border if you want to. So those are these are our last two sessions. So in her book, she does have a page about finishing on page 140 in there. And I read through people in class this morning like, oh, I didn't even know that. I didn't read the book. I'm like, that's why I'm here. I read through it for you. She talks about blocking the strips after blocking the whole blanket after you've joined the strips. And I thought about that and I read through about why she talks about it that way. And I thought for some of us who may be newer to crochet and some of these stitches, maybe some of our tension isn't particularly even on all of these strips. And I thought that maybe doing some light blocking ahead of time before you join the strips would be beneficial. And then if you decided after everything is all said and done, you want to block the blanket as a whole, you could do that as well. So that's kind of the approach I'm taking to this. I have not decided if I'll need to block my whole blanket when I'm done. We'll see. So that's the approach I'm going to take. So I'm going to talk to you about how I blocked my strips, and then I'm going to show you how I set it up to start to seam them together, and then give you some tips and tricks for that, and we'll go from there. Okay. So, so in my in my haste, I think I talked last time about I had a whole bunch of little pieces of all of these strips about this long. And I do. I have a whole bag of them that and all of them are just, the samples that I had done in class. And then I laid them all out and tried to decide which ones I really wanted to add to the blanket. Some of them I decided that the color combination I had chosen to do in class wasn't necessarily the combination I wanted to have once I had some more solid strips. So those I'm going to go back and redo. And then I started, so ones that I had a good portion done, I did go ahead and finish. I'm doing a smaller blanket. I'm doing more of maybe a crib blanket or a very, very small throw, more like kid size, mostly so that I could finish. And I do have 3 strips mostly done. And I say mostly done because I think I know what I want my finishing length to be. But as I started to work through this, and the 3 that I was working on were one was a textured strip. This was the sedge stitch. That was one of my very favorites to do. It's reversible. Another one was the alpine stitch, another textured strip. I liked that one too. And then this is one that we did, I believe last month, one of the puff stitches. I think this was the tiny puffs. Also, you didn't have to look at the pattern all the time, and I really liked it. So all of these, you could finish at any point really in the pattern. The only one that had a selection or a selected spot was, you started with 4 puffs, and you should probably end with 4 puffs on this. If I only ended with 3, because that's the way the length worked out, that would be okay. And then I started to do my next strip, which was this one, which really does need to end in a particular spot. It really should end, you don't want to end it here. I really do want to maybe end it at least at a half diamond, if not a full diamond. So I realized ahead of time, too late actually, that I should have done some of those strips first, because then I could make the rest of them. They were much easier to adjust. This one probably needs to be a particular length. So this is the next one I'm going to do, and I'm going to pull out. I'm just trying to give you some advice about how you're doing this if you've got a mix and match of these. since I'm doing kind of an optional length, I'm not doing the length she describes in the book. So I'm going to finish this one close to what I think my length is going to be, which is about 26 inches. That's how wide I want my blanket to be. So, and we'll see where that ends. And then I can adjust my other strips closer to match. But like she suggested in the book, when I stopped, I wound off some of the yarn, knowing that I might have to add extra rows or take off rows, but I had some yarn already attached. It just saved me another end I didn't have to weave in. So I did that for all of the strips I finished. And I've just used a stitch marker to attach that on there. So they're not the exact same length, but they're close to 25, 26 inches long in that range. And then as I was starting to lay them out, how I wanted them to look, like which ones I would want to attach to each other, um, that's when I realized that the difference in this one. That's when it started to become clear. I'm like, okay. And then I realized that while most of my edges, they're not all the same width, which is totally fine. That's not the point of this blanket, which, they're supposed to be different. Um, my edges were mostly straight, which worked out great. These are all signs that maybe I didn't need to really block the strips. But then I realized that all of these different textures have different kind of stretch and give to them. Some were a little firmer than others, even though I'm using all the same yarn and the same hook. The stitch definition, some of them made it, stretchier this way and not so stretchy this way. So I decided that maybe just a steam block to these strips, just to help open up the stitch and see how much stretch there was or wasn't, or how I wanted it to look, would be a good idea before I sewed them together. So that's what I did. And here's my approach to steam blocking. I just used a regular iron on my ironing board, and I get a clean dish towel. I have some of those big cotton ones, and I get it really, really wet, wring it out, and then I lay it on top of the strip and then hover the iron over, or if you've got a steamer, you could do the same thing. And it really did make a difference. And I really wish I had left one. I don't know if you can really tell. These have all been crumpled up in my bag too. So it really kind of helped smooth everything out as well. This one looks it almost looks like it's been pressed. And this one is, a little bit of a hot mess. So I was glad that I steamed them. Um, it helped them lay nice and flat. I got any of the bumps and creases out of it, which was nice because then when I seam it together, I'm really matching edge for edge. What I didn't want to have happen was I feel like this one, because it's got a lot of holes in it, is going to be stretchier than maybe this one, which tends to be a little firmer. What I didn't want to have happen is to not block them, sew them together, and then if I went to block the whole blanket, that this one I was trying to squish together so that it didn't, puff out or buckle out because it had so much stretch in it. So steam blocking and the whole thing, I did 3 strips, took me less than 5 minutes. This should not be a long process. You're not getting the whole thing soaking wet. You're just helping some of those fibers relax a little bit, opens them up, and it just smooths the whole thing out. And I think it will make seaming or joining your strips much easier. So that is my recommendation, is to just do a quick steam block on your strips ahead of time. You can leave your unfinished tops like that because I'm going to show you how I'm going to seam up to a certain point, each of them. And once I've got them all together, I can add rows or take away rows to make them all match up in the end. Because even though they might measure the same length, once I start seaming, there might be some give and pull, and you might need to take out a row or add a row just to make the other end meet up. Okay. Are there questions about any questions about the steam blocking? No? Okay, good. Um, it
All
was
good suggestions.
Yeah, it was
Wonderful
easy to
suggestions.
do, and I feel like it really just made a nice difference. So I'm going to switch to my camera and show you. I did try a couple different techniques, and I think I found it was actually the one she recommends in the book is probably the best technique for joining these strips. So let's see if I can do this right. Yay! Roxanne, I was telling her I got a new laptop and nothing is where I expected it to be. I'm glad I tried to set up ahead of time. All right, that's all crooked. Turn this around here. 1 second. Let's rotate. Oh, I didn't like when I did that, so let's turn it back. Well, we can't make it stop being crooked. That's so weird. There we go. That's a little better. Okay. So here I've got my two strips with my very obvious mistake that's all I see when I look at that next to each other. Some of your strips have right sides and some of them don't. So make sure when you're doing that you've laid them out correctly. Another tip, once you've laid them all out the way you want them, take a picture with your phone so that you can then stack them up, but you know which ones you're going to seam together that way. Okay. You're going to start at the end where we cast on, because those are finished edges. So we're going to want those to match up. And we're going to use some stitch markers to hold them together, so that we're meeting them up, keeping them together, and we're not getting any sort of, buckling or things like that. All right. So if you've got ends to weave in more than just the beginning and the ending, like there's a couple of them I think this one, where I have extra yarn because I ran out or I cut it and had to start again. So I've got extra ends. You can weave those in, but I am going to show you how you can add them as long as they're on the edge, how you can add, just catch them up in the seaming and really not have to weave them away. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to this is the right side of the alpine stitch. The said stitch is reversible, so it doesn't really matter. We're going to put the right sides together. And I'm going to match up my edges down here. And you can use straight pins for this. You can use stitch markers. This is what I had handy. And I would say every 3 inches, and I'm kind of patting as I go along here, making sure that I'm not getting any extra fabric. Pin them together, not at the edge, but just away from the edge so that you can keep working and not have to keep moving markers is my suggestion. I'm going to use a darning needle, but if you had straight pins, you could do the same thing just to keep them together like that so that you don't want to end up with something like this where you're having to ease it in. Okay. So it just keeps it together. When you're putting two different colors together, Esme's tip, and I agree, is to use one of the yarns that you're using. Don't use a separate yarn because we don't really want it to show. And choose the darker of your two colors, if there is such a thing. One that seems to be more dominant, use that one to do your seaming with. Okay. Depending on how long your strips are, you're going to cut a length You're going to cut a length of yarn. So I'm going to use my darker color. You don't want to cut a piece the entire length of your strip or more than that because it needs more than that. You're going to be pulling like yards of yarn through the whole time. So plan on, a manageable length in your hand. I would say, just over half the strip length would be good. I just cut, maybe 18 inches here. And once I show you how you do the whip stitch, which is what she recommends, you'll get an idea that, you're going to use more yarn than just, going in and out. But it would be a lot of yarn to pull through. And the more you kind of pull through the yarn, depending on your yarn, it might start to wear a little bit. All right. So she had talked about doing, and there are different ways to join crochet. Some people join it with a single crochet stitch, which is totally fine. We have nice straight edges on these. You could do that. The only downside is that when you are joining two pieces into the edge here, some of our stitches ended with like a single crochet and some ended with a double. So matching stitch to stitch across, which is what you need to do if you're joining with a single crochet, could be tricky, and you might have to fudge it a fair amount. Another option would be to slip stitch them together with a crochet hook. And I did try that. It provides a pretty firm seam, and it almost felt like a hard ridge between the two strips, which I didn't particularly care for. Another common way to seam together is mattress stitch, which is excellent in knitting, a little more complicated in crochet, although it can be done. But you run into some of the same problems in that we don't have the same kinds of ends on every strip. So you're not necessarily meeting apples to apples. Sometimes it's an apple to an orange. So you have to fudge a little, and then you're trying to finagle things in, which then comes down to the whip stitch, which once I tried it, it actually makes a really great low profile seam on the wrong side of the fabric. So, you do have a right side and a wrong side, but it made a fairly invisible seam, which I was pretty happy with. Okay, so let me get back to this. All right, so here's how we whip stitch. All right, so I've got my two ends here, starting at my two corners right here. Got my length of yarn and my darning needle. And right sides together. I'm going to start by joining. I'm going to turn it this way. I want to go through more than just one loop. So let me do it this way. I don't want to catch just one loop, because if it gets pulled a little bit, then you're going to get this big open gap. So I want to make sure I'm going through a couple of stitches, even splitting the yarn, because that is less likely to pull and show a gap. And I'm going to do that through both pieces of fabric. So they're sandwiched together. Got my corners, and I'm going to do a few stitches and then check to see how it looks. And I recommend you do the same thing, because then once you get a rhythm, you can stop and look every few inches to see how it's looking and make sure, you're not out of bounds. The other thing you want to do is make sure that you're not dipping down in a jagged line, that you're mostly staying in a straight line, away from the edge on both sides. Now, when I talked about catching your edges, so I have my two cast on where we did our chain edge strings. I'm going to lay those down. I'm going to catch those in. And then here's the tail from the yarn I'm using right now. I'm also going to lay that down, and I'm going to whip stitch over them. So all I've done is gone from the piece that's facing me, I'm going to call that the front, and the other side the back. So I went from the front to the back. Now I'm going to come back over to the front and I'm going to go in the same place again, going over my ends and pulling that. I don't want to pull it super tight. And when I check it here in a minute, you'll see, we'll be able to tell if it's too tight or too loose. I would err on the side of a little looser than super tight. Okay. And then I'm going to come back across over to the front again. And I'm going to go just a hair over, like into the next little section of yarn. And I'm hoping I'm catching it the same way on the other side. Oh, here I'm looking. Like here, I've only caught one strand there. So I'm going to change that. There we go. So and we're only doing it this way here at the beginning because we want it to be nice and reinforced in the beginning. And I'm going to do that one more time in the same space. Okay. So now that I've done my corner, I'm going to take that stitch marker out just because I want to be able to open it up and see. So I really don't see, it just looks like it blends from this color to this color. So I'm not seeing any like dark color obviously over into the light. Okay. So far so good. All right, close it back up. I've got my ends and now I'm going to go about a centimeter down or, a little over a quarter of an inch. It doesn't have to be exact, but you don't have to do every single row. That actually makes it, I think, a little too firm. We want these strips because they have different tension to have be able to move a little bit against each other, but not so much that they're pulling apart. So I'm going to come back over to the front. I'm going to go down, I'm going to say about a centimeter and go through. Again, pulling as tight as I think makes sense without really giving it a hard seam. Come around to the front, go down another centimeter. And I can feel I'm not catching much yarn on this side, so let's split that yarn. Feel free to split the yarn, particularly into the same color, because you'll never see it, if that helps. Okay, so about every other one, I'm going to stop and go back into the same space again and do that. Now go down another centimeter. And I'm just going over those ends. Go down another centimeter. And then this one I'll do twice. Okay, so I did a little bit here. I'm going to open it up and make sure I like the way it looks. So I've got one little strand that looks like it's kind of coming through, but that is not bad. If you didn't like the way that looked, you haven't gone that far, you could take it back and change how you want to do it. So give yourself a little section to sample to make sure you like how it's going to look. Because once you get the rhythm, I think it'll be fine. So I will take it back to here because I feel like that one is sticking. That's going to bug me. So all you have to do to take it out is, let me find my end here. And this is where you're glad that you don't have like 6 feet of yarn to have to pull through. Let's see here. This is the one right here. It might have been my double stitch. No, it was the first one. I didn't like where that went. So let's try that part again. But now, once I've gone, I would say maybe 3 or 4 inches over these ends, I can stop doing that and cut them, and I think you'll be fine. You don't have to worry about weaving them away. So let me thread my needle again. Okay. So it was this side that I want to make sure I'm not coming too deep on. So you can probably already tell that I think once you find a rhythm, this will go fairly quick, but it's going to be a little bit time consuming. But we've spent a whole year making these strips. I think it's worth it to take the time to put them together well. I did have somebody who got so excited about this project, she just went ahead and jumped in and just kind of worked on it on her own, which was great. And then she went through to do the seaming, and it was a mess. Her strips weren't lining up, and she had some of the tension was way off, and you could see a lot of the joining here, and she wasn't happy with it. So we did take apart all of the seaming. But that looks much better to me. I'm happy with that. So I'm going to turn it sideways here, and hopefully you can see there is not much of a seam that it pulls to the back. So here's what it's going to look like on the back. I'm going to trim my ends off here. And I think it looks fine. I mean, it looks like the back, but it looks fine. And I'm happy with the front. It really does lay quite flat because you're going fairly close to the edge. It really, you can hardly even feel a seam at all. So I was really happy with that, how that's going to come out. So that is whip stitching 101. Um, and then what I'm going to do is pretend I've gone all the way down. I'm going to do it. I'll have joined all of these all the way down, catching my ends until, so these clearly are not the same length, which is fine. And I will probably go to about here on all of my strips. So all of my ends will be different. And then I can decide, obviously, once I do the ones that are like this, that I really want to end in a particular way, it would be easy enough for me then to undo this yarn and either add stitches, take back stitches, and then do that finishing row of single crochet at the end. Because that's how each strip started. So I'm going to have a whole bunch of strips with ragged ends, and then that part can all be finished off after you've joined all of your strips. And that way you'll have a beginning or one side that lines up perfectly and another side that lines up perfectly. And you won't be stretching to make it fit. You'll actually be crocheting to make it fit. And you'll have a much better blanket that way. Are any questions about that?
No.
Nope. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
All right, let me go back to my cameras. Oh, see, I don't know where all these, there we go. All my buttons are on my new laptop. Um, so I think that's going to be the best way to go. Did you finish all your strips, Rocky? Yeah, we had neither. You're so funny. I'm guessing you have more than these little pieces, though.
Yes, I do.
So if that helps you feel good. And ultimately, because I'm doing a smaller blanket, I'm not going to have as many strips as the big blanket. We'll see. I'll see. I'll see.
I'll be working on it Black Friday.
Excellent. Perfect pajama party activity for sure.
Good.
So I feel like this is going to work well. We practiced on somebody's in class this morning and it worked out well. I think steam blocking is easy enough and it makes it just makes them so much easier to work with. And then next month, I'm going to give you a couple of border options if you want a border option to do. You can then block the whole thing afterwards if you want, but I feel like you're not going to have to adjust any of the tension in any of the strips if they've already been joined in a way where they weren't stretched or pulled or bunched together.
Mhm.
And then you can have some confidence if you're giving it as a gift, particularly, or if you know you're going to have to wash it on occasion, that it's going to come out nicely every time you wash it, that you're not going to have to fiddle with it every single time to make it look nice. So,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
So, that's it. That's all I've got today.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
next month, what we'll do is I'll show you how I finish all this off, and then I'll have some border options for you as well.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yep.
And I'll pick up those children's blocks.
Oh, yes, exactly. You can sometimes you can get them at like Five Below. Sometimes
Okay.
them. I didn't want to go driving around, so I found them on Amazon really inexpensive, but they were really nice. They're really nice to work with.
Mhm.
So ultimately anything that you need to block, I think these are great. They're not quite as thick as the things that are labeled blocking mats, but you're talking a third or a fourth the price. Like I'm fine with that. Um, it's just nice. You can lay this out on a bed. You can actually even prop it up against a wall if you need to for space. They stay together well, and you can make it any size you need to, or any shape you need to, really. So they're worth it.
Good. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So we'll see you next month.
Okay.
Looking
right.
forward.
All right,
Alrighty.
we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Okay.